All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. My name is Kristen Keller. I am a career counselor with the San Jose State Career Center. I'm excited to be talking to you guys today about the interviewing with confidence, especially in today's virtual world. We're having just one quick technical difficulty, so if you could hold on for just a moment. All right, so today's workshop, we understand that interviewing is something that creates a lot of nerves for a lot of people, even someone like myself. And my background is, prior to coming to San Jose State, I was a career counselor for many years, but even prior to that, I was in resources where I was involved in not only the interviewing process, but also the candidate selection process. So today I'll be sharing a lot of my favorite tips and tricks with you. But the truth is, confidence is a big part of this. All right. And before we dive in, I want to share in all transparency that even though I've been trained as someone who does interviews, I get nervous also, just like everybody else on this call. And actually one of probably my scariest instances was actually when I was interviewing for this job many years ago. And even though I had done so much preparation, I was still asked a question that I had not prepared for. And that question, and this is going to happen to all of us, was, I believe it was, what career counseling theory do you follow the closest when you do your day-to-day work with students? And I blanked. Of course, I know all the career counseling theories, but I was on the spot. I couldn't answer that. And so I kind of muffled my way around, but I turned it around. And this is something we'll be teaching you in today's workshop. And I basically said, if you don't mind, I would love to follow up with you afterward, because I do have someone on the tip of my tongue that I'd love to share with you. And so after the interview, once it was all over, I actually incorporated that into my follow-up email with the people that I interviewed with, and shared with them and thanked them for their patience, what my favorite theory was and how to handle it. So today we'll be talking a lot about tips about that. But with that in mind, an interview is not just about the employer deciding if they like you, okay? This is ultimately a two-way conversation to determine if you are a good fit for one another. And this is one of my first tips that I like to share with people, is that you are trying to understand if you like them and their company just as much as if they are deciding if you are a good fit. So this is truly an opportunity for both you and the employer to be marketing yourselves to one another. Okay, so for me, that takes away some of the anxiety, is actually I'm trying to understand them as much as they're trying to understand me. So we'll be talking a lot about the key to a successful interview, a lot in today's workshop, but it all begins prior to your interview, and that is in the research that needs to be done for each one of your interviews. So let's talk a little bit about the key pieces of research you must do and how to go about doing them. So the very first thing is that you need to have a very good understanding of the job description, specifically the key qualifications and skills that the employer is looking for, so that you can highlight and give examples of what you have to offer and what you've done in a similar way. Number two, and this is my favorite part of the interview, is it's really important that you have a series of stories that show your strengths that you are trying to market to the employer. So, and we'll talk about these stories further along in the workshop, but for example, let's just say that attention to detail and dealing with numbers is a really big part of this job that you're applying for. You need to have prepared in your mind, and for me, I always write them down, maybe one or two stories that show about how you dealt with a lot of data. What programs did you use to manage that data? How did you ensure that mistakes weren't made? But stories are a lot more powerful in an interview process than just telling someone that you are detail oriented. So you should have a handful of stories that highlight maybe the five or six key skills you want to make sure that the employer walks away with knowing that you have to offer. So to go along with those stories, you really need to have that understanding of how your skills and experience match up that job description. Okay, and we all know that there are going to be areas of growth that maybe you haven't touched on any these specific skills or use these specific programs. You should also be prepared to talk about how you will be able to come up to speed quickly in order to fill in those gaps. The last part, and this is often one that people miss, and this takes a little bit of time, but for every company that you interview with, you need to understand their mission, their products, their vision, and where they're going, okay? And there's a couple different places you can go to get this kind of information. LinkedIn is one of my favorites. You can also get some really great information on sites such as Glassdoor, but this is what makes you different and stand out in the hiring process, that you really understand what's going on with them. So another tip that we suggest is, in addition to really understanding your company's mission and where they're going, you want to understand what's going on with them. What cutting edge technology is coming out? Do they have any new initiatives going on? This will often pop up in their LinkedIn feeds, which is another good reason to be following those feeds. But it will also tie into, at the end of the interview, when they are asking if you have any questions, any knowledge you have about what's going on with their company can lead to really smart, good questions that make you look very, very prepared. So those are the 4 key areas of what you need to research prior to getting into the interview in order to set yourself up for success. All right, so this is one of my favorite slides because people are always trying to ask us, you know, what are the most common questions that I should be preparing for in order to, before my interview. And the reality is there's a ton of different questions that you're going to be answered, but this slide does a great job because you can actually drill down those common questions into 3 different areas. And if you can answer these 3 different areas, you'll basically be prepared for any question that is thrown at you. So let me go on and show you those 3 main areas. So the first area that's already up on the screen is the hiring manager is trying to understand, can you do the job? And what that falls into is they're going to be going through the skills required, whether it be Excel or Word or knowledge of social media, and they're going to be looking at your resume to determine if they think that you have experience in those areas. So they're really doing a skill match. Okay, so that's number 1, can you do the job? Number 2 is, will you do the job? And this is very different because will you do the job has a lot more to do with your attitude and what it's going to be like to work with you. So what is your potential? Can you come up to speed fast? Can you, how will you handle when problems come up? But it really is an attitude thing that they're looking for. Okay, and the last key area is another one of those personality things, is they're trying to trying to understand, excuse me, will you fit into my group? And what that comes down to is, will I like working with you? Will I enjoy passing you at the water cooler? Will I, we spend more time at work than we do with our own family members. So they're trying to really get a feel for who you are as a person, what your interests are, and what you can bring to the table. And this is something we'll talk about further in the workshop. But this is a challenge of virtual interviewing. It could be a little harder to get a feel for someone's personality, and we'll share tips in a second, but that's why your posture, what you're wearing, your facial expressions, and your energy level is even more important when you're virtually interviewing, because again, number 3, they're trying to understand, will you fit in with my team? And I'm going to pause there before we get move any further along. For anyone who has come on just in the last couple minutes, We're glad you're here. This is virtual interviewing being put on by the Career Center. In the chat box, there is a link to a sign-in sheet, and it's really important that you take a moment to fill that out. This will allow us to just follow up with you afterward if there's any important questions that came up or follow-up that needs to be sent. So thank you so much. And again, any questions can be answered or will be answered in the Q&A box. All right. So let's talk about professional appearance, because even though we are on Zoom, our appearance is just as important. I know you guys have all seen the jokes about, you know, party on the bottom, professional on the top. Be careful, because you never know when you're going to have to actually stand up, even when you're on a virtual interview. But this slide just gives some examples of what it means to look professionally when you are going to an interview. So we have a number of different examples here. We tried to, you do want to be able to show your personality, but typically there's the tip of dress for the job you want. So you want to be professional and but make sure that your personality comes out as well. You'll see here in the left-hand side, even at some of these companies that are local to here, like Google or Twitter, we know that they tend to be a little bit more casual. And if you get the job, you'll have the opportunity to, you know, maybe wear those more casual clothes as you get more comfortable and people get to know you. But it's always best to be just a bit more formal in the interview to put your best self forward. And we'll have some more tips on that on the next slide. All right, so here are some more of our top tips for virtual interviewing. And we'll go have some examples in a moment and actually give you the opportunity to interact and ask me some questions. Step one is to set up your virtual studio. And that is everything regarding the light in your room, what you have in the background behind your screen. You guys can see here today that I'm using a virtual background, and that is very purposeful as we all are in shared environments right now. And I wouldn't want one of my little kids to be running through the background or anything like that. Number two is to dress and groom professionally. And number three, to make sure that you have prepared yourself for the most common interview questions. And that's probably why some of you guys joined us today, is you wanted to get a better feel for those common interview questions. And we'll be going through all of those in a moment. Number four, and this is a tricky one, and honestly, this is one that I still have to practice on a day-to-day basis. If you guys could see my current situation, I actually have a yellow sticky note above my camera on my laptop, and that for me is the visual reminder to make sure I'm looking up and into the camera. It is very, very distracting if during your interview you're looking around the room, or if you're constantly down and looking at your notes. That can be very distracting. Also can be very distracting if you don't have all the materials you need right in front of you. You don't want to have to be reaching for pens or getting up because your phone is going off in the back of the room. Okay. Next, be very mindful of nonverbal clues or cues. Now, this is something that's really common when you're interviewing with people in person. You try and mirror their body language. Or even their energy at the speed they're talking. You need to do that just as much when you are doing a virtual interview. And if you notice that they seem to be, maybe you're losing them a little bit, maybe they don't seem as focused, maybe ask if they need to, you could always ask for them to repeat the question, or you could stop and say, is this the direction you were hoping to take? Is this is there anything else you'd like me to clarify next? So those would be some of the nonverbal clues or cues to look up for. And the last one is the importance of sending a follow-up email. This is critical because we are not getting to know each other as well on the virtual computer. So this can be an opportunity for you to clarify anything that maybe you missed in the interview, like I did with my example earlier. It could be a way to highlight why you're still very excited about the opportunity. Those are some of the tips there. All right, and it looks like we've got a couple questions coming on in through the Q&A. Thank you so much to Anita and Trisha for answering those, and feel free, Anita and Trisha, to unmute yourself if you'd like to have me address that with the group. All right, so here we're gonna have you guys interact with me a little bit more. Let's wake up, get moving a little bit. So I'm gonna have you use the chat box, and we're gonna kind of test your knowledge of first impressions. So we're gonna start by looking at picture A, this guy here with the beard. And there is something each one of the people in these pictures did wrong, or maybe they had the best of intentions but went wrong. So I'd like you guys to mention in the chat box, what kind of things did the guy in section A, where did he go wrong when it came to his virtual presence? And Anita or Trisha, I'll have you unmute yourself and just share what they're saying in the chat box.
Will do.
Thank you.
So we've got some people are saying the background is clearly not the best choice.
Yeah, it's very, very busy. Anything else that he could improve in A?
Lighting could be better. It's some feedback. Also clothing.
Yeah, he's not super professional.
Expression. I like the expression one. Someone said grooming.
Yeah, very good. That's exactly what we had in mind, everyone. Thank you. Let's do the same with B. So this guy has a very friendly demeanor, but there's still some places where he's missed it. So where has he missed the mark, Anita? What are people noticing on B?
Okay, lighting for sure. Let's see, what else do I see coming in here? It's like all lighting, everyone agrees lighting is the main issue here.
Yeah, the other thing that I think could be very interesting is just, I interview people all the time and I have student meetings with people all the time. We are looking for ways to connect with you. There's nothing at all in the background that's personal about it. So maybe you can think a little bit about having a simple background, but maybe there's something simple on the wall, or and of course your lighting is going to be key. All right, let's go to C. This is one of the most common problems I see, especially when we get to this point in the workshop. I've been talking for a while. You guys are getting tired. What did she do wrong in C, Anita? Or on the chat box, everyone.
It's funny because you call me out and I'm like, well, let me see what I think. No, so expression for sure in the chat. Others say that she comes off as potentially not organized with the way the desk is situated, not making eye contact via camera, showing too much background, posture.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anita. A couple other things that weren't mentioned. It's very important that your top is not too low. You don't want to call too much attention to that. And just be careful. And I've caught myself on video a couple times touching my face. So be really careful of that. But really, she seems tired. She seems hunched over and completely uninterested. So they're going to be gauging your interest in the company. Let's be careful. So let's do one last one. For D, please put in the chat, where did this woman go wrong for D?
Trisha, I'm going to have you take this one because my dog is going crazy.
No worries. Everybody is saying that it's her eye makeup and she's too close.
Yeah, exactly. So while you want to show your own personality, and we actually really suggest you keep things a little bit more neutral, and any accessories that you have on, you don't want them to be too loud or too distracting. And again, to be careful with just how close you are to the camera. So thank you guys for playing along. Obviously, you picked up on all of these things. So one thing I realize is not in this workshop that we haven't said is, and we have one last career fair coming up this semester. So this is an opportunity you guys are going to have to practice. On Thursday, we have the Health and Human Services job and internship fair. And if you are interacting with an employer, whether it be in a group setting or in a one-on-one setting, have your camera on if possible. Okay, it's really hard to be talking into a black screen. And let's just say you're in a group session, there's 30 people. If you all have your cameras off, it's very, very hard for you to stand out. We will notice who has their cameras on, and we will be looking at your backgrounds. So, all right.
Kristen, before we move on, there was one question that's kind of in this realm that I wanted to know if you could answer live, and that was, what should I have in my virtual studio? And that kind of relates to this slide as well.
Absolutely. So as far as what you should have in your virtual studio, we say to prepare yourself, make sure you have a pen and pencil in case any notes or anything you need to follow up with afterward. Make sure your phone is muted and away. Having access to your calendar so that any scheduling of next appointments is going to be very easy. Anything else, Anita or Trisha, that I'm missing as far as what to have in your virtual studio?
I'm sorry, just full disclosure, I took a big bite of my lunch. So don't do that during your interview.
Yeah, don't eat.
But lighting is huge. So make sure that you have proper lighting in your virtual studio, and beware of your backgrounds.
Absolutely. Great question. And please keep them coming. So let's talk about, here are some people who did it very well. Okay. And so I just wanted to kind of point this out. The people in these shots here have really nice facial expressions. They seem very happy, engaged. You can see that their desks are very simple. They are not cluttered. Great lighting. And one thing that we oftentimes forget, in the upper right hand corner, he's actually greeting the interviewer. And I mean, this is really personal as to if you typically wave or say goodbye to people, you do or don't have to do that. But I think it is important for you to incorporate your hands when you're speaking, if that's what you normally do, and to make sure that you're not completely frozen like a robot, because then we start to wonder if you are actually there or if it's just a picture of you. So keeping that engagement with your body language, how you're leaning, is all very, very critical. All right, so let's get to the point where let's talk about the common interview questions. We talked about earlier how the common questions that are used by a interviewer, they're going to range based on the industry that you're in, the level of the position you're applying for. But really they all come down to, can you do the job? Will you do the job? And will I like working with you? But let's get a little bit more detailed than that, and let's go over the top 10 most common questions. Feel free to take a picture if you'd like to capture these. And I also want to make a quick plug. Here at the Career Center, in addition to doing workshops like these, we also have a lot of apps and tools that you can access at any time of day or night off of our website. And one of those tools is called the Interview Guide. And the Interview Guide has all of the questions we'll be going over today, as well as tips on how to answer those questions. And if you're more of a virtual practicer, we also have a tool that's totally free to San Jose State students. It's called Big Interview. And you log in through your SJSU1 account. And basically, it will break down all the possible questions that you could be asked, tips on how to answer it, and there's actual video capabilities so that you can actually record yourself answering these questions. That is going to allow you to give yourself your own feedback as far as how you look, but you could also email your recordings to a career counselor that you're working with, a teacher, or even a family friend who can give you some feedback on your interviewing answers. All right, so without further ado, these are the most common questions. oops, sorry about that, that you will most likely get during the interview process. So in preparation, at a bare minimum, you need to be able to answer some form of these questions. And I encourage you to practice this out loud, either online or with a friend, to make sure that it's coming out correctly in a way that you like. It's got to be short, succinct, and but basically the number one question, tell me about yourself. We're going to practice that one in a moment because I know that one is a little bit tricky. Number two, why should I hire you? They're trying to determine how are you different than the other handful of candidates that they're interviewing. Number three, why do you want to work here? Okay, and this is one that used to be a real pet peeve of mine when I was in the recruiting field. It was obvious when a person was interviewing for like 5 or 6 different companies, they just needed any job. And so you really want the interviewer to feel like you have prepared and you really want this job. And the way to do that is through your research and your knowledge of the company. Number 4, you guys have probably heard of this one. What is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness? I'll be giving you guys some samples of that in a moment. That's a tricky one, but once you understand why they're asking, it's not that difficult. And the last one is tell me about a time when. And this is actually a very different question than the rest of the 4. It's actually called a situational or behavioral question, and they're assessing something different. They're actually trying to determine they're trying to predict how you will act in situations in the future by determining how you acted in past internships, classes, difficult situations. Okay, so tell me about a time when is a common type of behavioral interview. So if you haven't already, take a screenshot, and you can also find these questions and the other common 10 plus both on the San Jose State interview guide, which is on our website, as well as in Big Interview. All right, so without further ado, I want to give you guys some tips on how to answer the question, tell me about yourself, because this is one that causes the most kind of anxiety for a lot of people. So pull out your cameras or feverishly write this down. Here is what we need you to understand. Okay, here are our tips for this question. So number 1, you need to keep your answer under a minute, and this is trickier than it sounds, so it should be something that you practice. If you go on and on for too long, you're going to lose your interviewer. So basically, you want to narrow it down to these 4 bullets are what you should be covering in this answer. So number 1, we're all here because we're San Jose State students, so clarifying what you're studying and how far along you are in your degree. Okay, because they're trying to gauge whether you're looking for an internship, for full-time job, part-time job, and so on. Number 2, you need to show them and get them excited to learn more about your experience, okay? And your experience is not just paid experience. It's actually anything from relevant coursework that you've taken at San Jose State or elsewhere, which is related to the job. Remember, this can also be classes you've taken on LinkedIn Learning, or if you recently went to like one of our Data Science for All seminars to pick up some new skills, that can be there as well. Class projects, any volunteering you've done in the community that maybe exposed you to a similar population that you'd be working with on the job, or of course, any paid work experience. Number 3, it's really great to be able to highlight maybe one of your proudest achievements so far. And again, we'll give you an example in a moment. And number 4 is you want to give them an overview of what your professional goals are and how they line up for this position so they can understand why you're interviewing for this position and hopefully why you'd be happy with them for quite some time. All right, so these are the keys to tell me about yourself. And this is, in some form or another, you're going to be asked this in every single interview. So let's go ahead and take a moment to show you what it sounds like to answer this question well. So here's an example from a college student like yourself. I am currently a senior studying human resources at San Jose State University, where I've also been paying for college through working part-time at Company X. So step one, they have clarified what they are studying and how close they are to graduation. So while at Company X, I've had the opportunity to assist with new employee orientation and benefits enrollment for their 350 employees. So here you are hitting that bullet of showing how you have relevant experience. What I'm most proud of was earning the March MVP award for my role at the company's open enrollment. So here you found a way to highlight how you might be different or what you did to stand out. And to wrap up your answer, I love training and educating employees. So this gives them an idea of maybe some of your goals or what you enjoy doing at work that you might like to do more of. And I'm looking for a new role that's going to expose me to additional areas of HR, such as employee wellness and performance management. So you're using those nice keywords connected to your interest in HR to show them that you really do understand what this field is all about. Okay, so this is an example of what your answer would sound like in order to tell them about yourself. And if this example was helpful for you, I'm hoping that you're writing some notes to yourself and maybe some ideas. I also want to remind you that through the Career Center, we have over 10 career counselors who have similar training to myself, who are available for virtual one-on-one appointments if you would prefer to get some feedback on your answers. And all of those appointments can be booked using your SJSU1 ID through the Spartan Connect app. So if you would like to meet with a career counselor and really work out these answers, you'll have that opportunity through booking with us on Spartan Connect. So let's move on to our next question and next common question, which is tricky. We want to give you guys some examples of this. So this is the one that makes everyone cringe. What is your biggest weakness? So let's start by sharing some tips about why you're being asked this question. All right, so this question can go very, very wrong if you don't follow these tips. Number one, you want to make sure you pick a weakness that is not critical to the job. And an example of this would be if this is a big data science job and they talk about how you use Excel to crunch numbers, please do not tell us that your weakness is Excel. Okay, because that's going to immediately take you out of the running. So you need to, number one, pick a weakness that's not critical to the job. Number two, there's actually a really good method. It's called the sandwich method. And the sandwich method is basically you're going to answer them with a weakness, but you are going to follow it by basically mentioning 1 to 2 items that you're doing to make this weakness easier for you or better for you. So, for example, there'll be a sample in a moment about someone who had some difficulty giving critical feedback in the past and how they actually took some classes on LinkedIn Learning to learn more about this skill and practice. Okay, so that's the sandwich method. So it's mentioning your weakness, but also following it by 1 to 2 strengths, or even sometimes mentioning a strength and then the weakness and then 1 more strength. So actually sandwiching your weaknesses with your 2 strengths is another technique that we can work with you on. So we've kind of hit on this already a little bit, but the common mistakes, number 1 is picking the wrong weakness. It's critical to the job. Number 2 is when I ask you this question as a recruiter, denying that you have any weaknesses is not what I'm looking for either, because none of us are perfect. We're all growing, okay? So it's a matter of picking the right one. And the other thing is actually another really big pet peeve of mine that's actually really common is if you go online and you Google how to answer the question, what is your biggest weakness? A lot of people will say, why don't you just say you're a perfectionist? But the problem is all the recruiters have heard that a million times. It's kind of like a cheater answer and you're trying to turn it into a strength. So we'll give you some tips on how to do that better in the next slide. So let's get some examples of how this can be done well. So for example, early in college, I was on a group project where a friend told me my feedback for another team member's performance came off as too harsh. Usually people see my honesty as a strength, but I've learned that different people require different approaches when critical feedback is provided. So just highlighting here that they are admitting to having a weakness. They came off wrong to someone. However, they do a really nice job of sandwiching it because they highlight that, oh, I'm sorry, it's actually not boxed off, but basically in the top paragraph, usually people see my honesty as a strength, but they've kind of had some awareness about that. So let's do the second paragraph. Since that group project, I completed a LinkedIn Learning course on professional communication where I practiced adapting my delivery based on people's body language and personality. The training I received was so helpful that recently a team member acknowledged my ability to address, diffuse, and resolve a situation where another student wasn't pulling their weight. So what you can see that this person did really well is that they actively were aware of their weakness. They've actually taken steps to improving it by taking some online courses. And better yet, it's improved. And they use an example of that by highlighting that a team member acknowledged that they really saw some improvement on this. Okay, so that's an example of how you can really answer that question well, but still come off as authentic. All right, so I'll take a quick pause here and thank you to everyone who's still with me. I hope you're getting some valuable tips. We're going to go over quickly. There are some questions that you want to make sure that you're not answering. We'll go over those in a moment. But if you did come on late, in the chat box, there is a registration link. So make sure you've confirmed your attendance at this so you can get a follow-up. And Anita, do we have any questions that have come on, common questions on the chat box about these questions that we might want to discuss as a group?
So not specifically to the types of common questions, but there was a question earlier, and I'm not sure if you'll be talking about group interviews or the difference between group and individual interviews at some point, but they want to know what your biggest piece of advice would be for virtual group interviews, and maybe some tips in that space too.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially with the events that we have coming up with the career fair. And the Career Center also does a lot of like employer chats where the employer will come on for an hour and they will invite a group of students to listen in. And typically the goal is for the employer to be able to address the group, tell them about their product, services, what's next, and then the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions to learn more. So as far as tips, I've been myself in a number of group interviews and I've also facilitated them. So the ones that stick out to me is number one, to have some really smart questions prepared that cannot be answered on the website. Because if you're asking questions that are on the website, you haven't done your homework. Okay, and we have some sample questions at the end of this that we'll share with you. Number two, be careful of interrupting both your interviewer, but also in a group setting. If a lot of people are talking, just make sure you follow the order of events. If you do overspeak someone, make sure I apologize, feel free to go ahead. So being common courtesy is very important. And I think number three is just to make sure you're reading the room. It's really easy when you're asking a question to go on and on. So just make sure you're keeping it short, concise, you're reading the room. And I lied. One other tip that I think goes over very well in a virtual environment is there's going to be other people asking questions in addition to you. Let's just say that Anita just asked a question about the products. One thing I really like when it's my time to speak up is to be like, I agree with Anita. I really I saw that update as well, but being able to like add on to what other people are saying to show that you're actively listening and you are actively interacting with the group, I think is a tip that I like. And there's a lot of other tips online. Anita and Trisha, are there any other tips that you guys have I haven't touched on that I should incorporate?
No, I think you hit all the big points with group interviews. I would also just keep in mind of timing. So just be cognizant of how much you're talking, because I think sometimes when there's, you're trying to share the spotlight with a lot of other people and in the same environment, you might sometimes be inclined to want to keep talking, but also that's okay to share your idea and then move on. The other piece is, don't get too razzled if an interviewer asks for you to collaborate with someone else. So like if they give you guys a problem to work on together, a lot of that is just analyzing, how the group works and how you work with others. So that's usually a big part of the group interview process is, the team collaboration. So a lot of the tips you gave would also, bode well for working with other people on a call.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anita. I know that when we were giving a lot of tips on people who are doing more interviews in person, we used to tell people that your interview begins the moment that your car pulls up in front of the employer. Like if they have a window and they can see through, they can see what you're doing, scurrying around, putting on makeup, making phone calls. The same thing when you walk in the door and you sit down and you're waiting to meet with your employer. They are going to be watching how you interact with the secretary or the people sitting next to you. So just make sure you're aware of that in a virtual environment. And if they get you into a group setting where you're having a group discussion, don't, like Anita said, don't be the main focus of the conversation. Don't overtake it. Be polite, but be engaged and make sure your facial expression shows that. Great questions. So feel free to go ahead, and if you have any other tricky ones, to put those in the Q&A box as well. But for now, there are a couple questions you don't have to answer. So let's just make sure you guys are aware of those. So there are some illegal or improper questions. And some of those are regarding age, race, disability, as well as gender-related questions, national origin, religion, your family situation, and any of your medical conditions. So these are areas that employers in California are not allowed to ask you about. Now, this could actually be a little bit tricky, and we'll tell you if. So most recruiters have been trained in how not to ask these questions and why it's so important. But every once in a while, you are going to come across a hiring manager that hasn't had the training and may accidentally ask one of these questions. So there's a couple different ways that you can go about it. I will tell you the one that I think often comes out on accident is if someone was to find out they went to the same university as you, you don't necessarily need to say like the year that you graduated if you think that that's being connected with your age, or you don't necessarily need to say, let's just say you have some family responsibilities at home. You don't necessarily need to bring that up in the first interview. So there's some touchy things here that I'd encourage you, if you have any questions, to sit down and talk with a career counselor about. But these are the areas that you actually do not need to answer questions on. So like I said, you could answer them if you're comfortable doing so, but let's just say that you notice this is an illegal question. One way that could be a polite way of answering would be, I'm not quite sure how this relates to the job, and I'd like to focus a little bit more on my skills and qualifications, specifically in using Excel or whatever. So that's just one example of that. Okay. So at the beginning of the workshop, I told you that one of the ways to stand out is to have some really good questions prepared, because it shows that you really did your homework. So people are always asking, oh, what are your favorite questions? So we put a couple of them on the screen. Feel free to take a picture of these if you like any of them specifically. Oops, sorry about that. But these questions are all very strategic because they're highlighting a good tendency in yourself as far as what are the opportunities for growth. It shows you're thinking about your future with the company. It can be really helpful to get a little bit more nitty gritty as far as the typical day and what the typical responsibilities are. You know, maybe this is a marketing position and you want to find out how much of the marketing is really focused right now on online or Instagram versus you're in meetings with the higher ups discussing higher level marketing strategy. If you were to ask about the most challenging aspect of the position, it might give you an insight into maybe an area that you could brush up on, or maybe they say that the reporting is the hardest and you can actually highlight that you've been doing some extra training on your own to learn reporting skills. And last but not least is asking about the next step in the hiring process, the timing of that, and what you can expect is a really good thing so that you understand where you go from here. So in the chat box, if you guys would like to, if any of you have a really good question that you've used in the past that you'd like to share with the group, why don't you go ahead and add that in there. Or if we don't have anything in the chat box, Anita or Trisha, if you guys have any of your favorite questions that you've been asked, is anyone who'd like to contribute to this?
So I don't see anything coming in through the chat. I do have a question that seems to be popping in the Q&A. Let me check that really quick. Okay, this is about how long to wait. Should they wait to hear back from someone? I think we'll hold on that one for just a second, but that is a really good question. Favorite questions to ask the interviewer. I always like to know like what a good candidate, you know, would look like in this position. Like what is your ideal candidate for this role? And then anything that they talk about that I think I have, then I'd say like, I'm so excited to hear that because it basically prompts me to highlight which part of my resume or experience directly connects with what they're saying is good for an ideal candidate.
Absolutely.
Ones.
Thank you, Anita. And as far as the question in the group, as far as, you know, how long to wait for follow-up, that is something that you can kind of
read the whole question to you. It's a couple, let me give you the whole context.
Great, thank you.
So how long should someone wait to hear back post-interview? I was told that I will not have to attend phone interviews and will move directly to video interviews. So that's good news, whoever is getting that response. That was about 2 weeks ago. Should I reach out to them? If so, what should I say?
So those are really great questions. And it's very, you have to really tailor it to your current situation. But as far as, I always ask at the end, can you tell me a little bit more about where you're at in the interviewing process? And Anita, you've got a little backup or background, so if you want to mute yourself, that would be great.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. So you never know how, you know, maybe you're candidate number 5 but you're the first person to interview. It could take a whole nother week or even 2 for them to interview the remaining 4 people. So it's really helpful, this last question on the screen, to find out, you know, where are you at in the interview process? When do you expect to decide who will be going to the next phase, and what does the phase look like, and when could I expect to hear with either a yes or a no? So that's a really good way to do it. As far as when to follow up, I do think that if it was 2 weeks ago, and hopefully you've already done at least one follow-up right after your interview, but I do think at that point it would be a good time to reach out, probably via email, to the hiring manager to reaffirm that you're still very interested, and just check to see if they have decided on the next steps. And you could even maybe highlight one thing about that reminded them that you're a really good candidate. I think that the really tricky thing right now going on with COVID, I have a lot of friends that are hiring managers, and positions get approved and then that can change. Or, you know, maybe you also have to think about who are the candidates for this position. So they're interviewing you and they found you on a job board, but they may also have a couple referrals coming in from people who already work at the company. So there's a lot of other people in the process. Tip number 3 is if you have ever been on the hiring side, you know how much time it takes to coordinate interview schedules with 3, 4, 5 people, especially if they're higher up in the organization. They're very, very busy. And that's the only thing you can do in that situation is to ask very clear questions and just say, when does the next stage of the process, or for the person you are planning to hire, when are you hoping for them to get started? Oh, you'd like them to get started by November 1. That is going to help you gauge where you're at in the interview process. Hopefully that answers something more. Great questions.
I just wanted to add one thing, and you'll have to forgive me if you guys hear dogs again. An employer, although we would expect people to like let us know if they're not going to choose us, because that would be just helpful so we can move on with our lives and know like what the outcome was. Because of the volume of candidates and interviews that happen, you may not get a response from them saying if you did not get the position. So if it's been more than, you know, several weeks and you've already sent out an email to follow up and you still don't hear back, it's probably safe to say that they may have gone with another candidate, and it's just a good time to maybe move forward. You wouldn't necessarily need to send an additional follow-up after your secondary check-in. I know that's a frustrating thing sometimes to like not know, but at the same time, I just remind people, don't take it personal. We just had, you know, a session with a recruiter from Microsoft last Friday, and he was talking about how much volume of applicants he gets, and you know, he wishes he could respond to every single person, but unfortunately, it's not, you know, always easy for them to get back to individuals. But it's not a personal kind of rejection, so to speak, even though it might feel that way. So make sure you keep persistent and keep going, because eventually one of those interviews are definitely going to be the right fit for you.
That's such a great tip, Anita. And I want to add one more thing to that, is it's really important that you keep it positive. So it's really common to feel defeated and frustrated if you don't get a position, especially if you feel like you were a really good fit for it. But it's so important for you to stay positive with that employer, because here's the deal. Maybe you end up as number 2 and you don't get position A, but who's to say that in another 2, 4 weeks, even 2 months, another position's going to open up that's even more perfect for you. And if you left a good taste in their mouth, they're going to reach out to you again to see if you're still available. So if you've gotten snarky with them or ghosted them, then they're not going to be keeping you in mind for future opportunities. So it's really important you always keep it positive, and remember the interview process is try not to take it too personally. It can be challenging, but the right opportunity will come up. And if you've had a number of interviews and you are not getting through that process, or maybe you're always number 2, that is a really good sign. That's a good opportunity for you to sit down and make an appointment with a career counselor, because maybe we can help you tease out where things might be going wrong and get increase your likelihood of getting to that next stage. All right, so we talked a little bit about follow-up. And I really like this slide because it kind of breaks down the steps to the follow-up process. Don't want to miss any of these steps, especially if you're one of 10 people interviewing for a position, because it's easy for them to forget. So even before you leave, it is really important, if you're very excited about this job, to show that enthusiasm, even letting them know that you look forward to hearing from them and that you really feel like you would be a great fit for this position. Do not forget to write down the names and the email addresses of people that you met with, because that will allow you to send that personalized follow-up email, and make sure that you keep that engagement and that eye contact before you leave. So within 12 to 24 hours, it's really easy. Once that interview ends, you're exhausted and you don't want to think about it anymore. But once you've taken a little rest and you've walked away, you really do need to reflect on what went well. Maybe there were some questions you answered great, but maybe there were others you would answer a little differently next time. Write it down so that you can remember it. And also, if you learned anything through that interview process about new products that are coming out or a new direction for the company, write that down too, because being able to incorporate that into your thank you note could really show how serious of a candidate you are. And number 3, within 1 to 2 days, you want to go ahead and send that thank you. Typically these days, we're seeing that happen over email. Also, it is a great idea to consider sending some LinkedIn requests if you connected really well with any of your interviewers and you want to remain in their network to network with them. However, if you do that, it's really, really important, and we talked about this more in our LinkedIn workshop, that you personalize your LinkedIn request. So there's a box where you can actually add some text. Don't just hit connect. Make sure that you have explained how much you enjoyed meeting with them and discussing XY position and that you would love to be a part of their professional network. That personalization is really important. All right. So as we get towards the end here, I want to make sure you know about our interview resources. I have highlighted throughout the interview guide, which gives a lot of great tips. It's on our website on how to prepare and what you want to say to some of those common questions. Number 2, you've learned about Big Interview, and you know that you can do practice interviews on there as well as learn about how to answer certain questions. And number 3, you now understand that through Spartan Connect, you can go online and schedule a one-on-one meeting with a career counselor if you'd like some personal feedback. All right. So last but not least, a lot of our tools are available on our website. So here's our website here, sjsu.edu/career center. For those of you guys who are wanting to get more information on the upcoming job fairs, any of our employer events where you can practice these interviewing skills or even apply for jobs, that can be done on Handshake at sjsu.joinhandshake.com. As far as for questions that didn't get answered during today's workshop, you can always send a general email to careerhelp@sjsu.edu. And we even have a live real-time Q&A feature on our website these days. So we have some great student staff that are answering those chat questions if you go to sjsu.edu/career center. And if we, hopefully someday we'll get to be doing these workshops back in person again. We are located in the administration building on campus on the 2nd floor, but until then, you will find all of our services online at your fingertips. All of our apps are available to you, and our career counselors are all working virtually and doing meetings through webinars and Zoom in order to support you during this time. So last but not least, we are constantly trying to improve our workshops to make them more interactive and helpful for you. Please take a moment and use this URL. Either Anita or Trisha, I'll ask you to copy this URL and put it in the chat box so it's easy access to our students. It's just a matter of about 4 questions, and by answering those 4 questions and giving us feedback, you will be eligible to earn a $20 Amazon card. So I'll leave that on the box there for a second. Once again, my name is Kristen Keller. I'm the health career counselor here at San Jose State. It's been a pleasure to share some of my favorite tips and tricks with you today. Thank you to those of you who added in some questions. Are there any other last minute questions that have come on through the Q&A or the chat box that you'd like to ask?
No, it looks like you answered everyone's questions. I don't see anything except for a thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Anita and Trisha, for helping me on the back end. And please, everyone, take care and make sure you take advantage of the opportunities that are happening and the employers that are coming to campus virtually through the Career Center, through our Career Center events, our fairs, like the Thursday event for the health fair. Any opportunity you have to practice your interviewing skills is a good one right now. So best of luck, take good care, and hope to see you in person very soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.